Welcome to How to Live Slow, the podcast where we discuss slow living for the modern woman and help you design an intentionally slower family life. I'm Rachelle Glendon, your personal slow living coach and host of this podcast. I know all about busy, but I love living slow. Enjoy the show. Well, hello and welcome to another episode 3 in the Mental Load May series. This is How to Live Slow and I am Rachelle. If this is the first time we're meeting, hello and welcome, or welcome back. If you're a long-time listener, it is so great to have you and I hope you're really well. So this is episode 3 in this series and we're talking about the mental load and sharing the mental load. If you want to go back and listen, we've done an introduction to Mental Load May, which was all about what the mental load is and why it's important to really think about it and how beneficial it can be to figure out some strategies around sharing it, offloading it, and releasing ourselves from underneath it to think beyond the mental load. And then we spoke about doing the inner work first, because this is in the second episode, the inner work of motherhood, is really learning to value what we do as mothers and doing the inner work of that so that we can face ourselves and the things that we're doing that may be not beneficial to ourselves and to our families. Because if you want to change your life on the outside, you have to change on the inside first. That is my big belief. And today, very excitingly, we're going to be talking about the power of matriarchy and becoming more self-led, stepping into your womanhood, releasing yourself from good girl conditioning and the patriarchal motherhood modeling, martyr mothering, and becoming that matriarch of your family, being self-led, taking ownership and leadership of the direction you want your life and your family life to go. So this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where things are going to get really, really fun. Last week's episode was quite deep. If you know anything about me, you know that I'm a bit of an oversharer. I tell it like it is. I tell you my whole story, and I shared a little bit more about my past and my therapy experiences and how this led me kind of along this journey to feeling really content in my motherhood, which is a fabulous place to be, actually. So let's talk about the power of matriarchy and the right kind of communication. And I've got a couple of strategies as well, but as always, I like to start with a story. And my story today is about who takes out the bins. Now, I don't know about you, but we've all got in our relationships. Now, actually, before I tell you this story, I just want to preface this by saying that all of this work comes with the belief that, I talk about relationships and my husband because that's my experience. You may be in a different kind of relationship. You may be a single mother. You may be seeking outside support. You might be co-parenting. You may be in a same-sex relationship. It doesn't really matter how you're approaching it and what your dynamic is. There will be things in here that will be of use, hopefully, because these are just things to do with relationships in general. I'm talking about my family dynamic with me, my husband, and my 2 sons. But these concepts of communication and everything can work for any relationship. I just want to preface by saying that because I know that my dynamic, although it's the more air quotes, this is my favorite term, air quotes, I'm saying this a lot, but it's the more traditional kind of relationship. But that's not to say that I'm expecting that everybody is experiencing that or that that is the only right way. I just want to say that. But yes, so now that I've said that, I also want to say that I'm coming from a relationship where the underlying relationship between me and my husband before we had kids was tight and solid, and we were very equal in our relationship. And the issues that we faced came about when we fell into traditional roles because of the surrounding culture. So the culture issue or the problem wasn't necessarily within our relationship. Our relationship struggled under patriarchal motherhood, patriarchy and capitalism, and all of that dynamic that says what mums and dads' roles are and how that, as a modern woman and a modern man, how that became friction within our relationship. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. You may not be in a relationship where you can have these conversations and, you have to think about where you're coming from. Is your relationship inherently safe place for you, or do you need some other support? And I'm talking about things like the reality of domestic violence and coercive control and things like that. So have a real think about your safety when you're having these conversations with your partner and whether it is the right choice for you. And of course, seek the support that you need if you need to exit those relationships as well, rather than, because there are going to be ways of getting you, the most unsafe moment in a relationship with that kind of dynamic is when you leave. So, and we all know that. So I just want to make sure that if you're not feeling safe or you feel like these conversations may not work for you, that is more than okay. And if you do need any support in that way, please reach out to me or another service that can help you. But I just wanted to say that because this is, we're all very aware that these issues of domestic violence and coercive control very much in our mind frames at the moment. And I just want to acknowledge that side of things. So, assuming that you're in a relationship where the underlying relationship prior to kids was good and solid and equal, and that you may be coming up against some issues just because you're now a mother and you've experienced your matrescence, which is the transformation of motherhood, you don't feel like you're the same person anymore because things have changed significantly for you, whether that's because you've gone on maternity leave and you just fall into the traditional roles of, well, I'm at home, so I'll do those things. And then you come up to a friction point where you're returning back to work and suddenly you're trying to do everything you were doing before plus working, and you feel maybe resentment rising up or overwhelm towards your partner because it never occurred to you to have a conversation about the equitable sharing of the mental load or the equitable sharing of the domestic load or all of the things that need to happen to help the family run correctly or well, in the way that you imagined it. So there are friction points in our relationships. For me, it was when I decided that I wanted to start doing my podcast and my time was a little bit more stretched and we didn't really realize what was going on behind the scenes. Yeah, so, okay, all of that. That was a lot of setup. I apologize for the lengthy setup there for the episode. But I think it's always important to mention these sorts of things because we're all in different, situations. So my story is about who puts the bins out. And this is really funny because I don't know about you, we've all got these kind of little fights that we have in our relationships, like the same fight keeps coming up all the time. And, one of ours is who puts the bins out. And we both sometimes will stack up all the recycling boxes and things on top of the bin. And it just gets to a point where, come on, someone has to notice. And in my mind, I'm like, surely I do everything. Now I say I do everything. And this is, of course, me doing black and white thinking where it's not actually the case. We both contribute, but I'm thinking in my mind like, I do everything. Can't he just take the bins out? Why hasn't he noticed that the bins need to be taken out? How long can I possibly leave it until he notices? And then inevitably I just get frustrated and I put the bin out or I say something or whatever. And I didn't really realize what was going on with this until I read the book Drop the Ball by Tiffany Dufu. And she was explaining an exact scenario of this where she calls it imaginary delegation, where I've decided in my mind without telling my partner that this particular job that I want him or her to do is for her or him. So I've decided in my mind he needs to put the bins out, so I'm going to leave it. And then inevitably, because I haven't said anything, it doesn't get done. And it doesn't mean that I need to be the one to say it, but there's never been a conversation about, hey, that's your job? Can we agree that that's your job? So she calls it imaginary delegation. And ultimately, because you haven't had a conversation about it, you get frustrated, and then that, evidence that you, the righteous one, has been gained because they haven't done the job that you haven't asked them or communicated with them about. So this is imaginary delegation. And I totally fell into this. Like I would walk around going, why hasn't he done these jobs that I want him to do, without ever actually saying anything? Now, this is a form of passive communication, and as is nagging. So again, like I spoke about in the previous episode, nagging, it's another one of these things of it's an outcome of martyr mothering or patriarchal motherhood where we do it but it's not our fault, but we get into this dynamic where it's a chicken and egg. So we nag because we're not sure how to communicate. We know there's an issue, but we haven't really thought I should communicate this, or why do I have to keep reminding him, where we haven't sat down and spoken about the things that are going on in our relationship where we're not happy, our needs aren't being met, we feel unappreciated, we're feeling frustrated and overwhelmed or even resentful. But we're passively communicating by nagging, and that causes arguments. So we're getting, it's a weird conundrum where we don't ask or speak directly to the things that are causing us friction. And then in some weird roundabout way, we end up getting exactly what we're trying to avoid by not having that conversation, whether we're aware of it or not. So by nagging, we end up fighting about the issues that we wish we could just resolve because we're being really passive, rather than sitting down and having a conversation and saying, here's what's up with me. This is how I'm feeling about the situation at the moment. So when you go direct and you have these conversations, you have to come from a place, and this is why the previous episode was about valuing motherhood. You have to come from a place where you believe in your heart that you deserve an equal place in your relationship and your family at the head of your family as the matriarch. And you have to understand that what you do in your caring work as a mother, whether you have a paid job or not, contributes equally to the family, because evidence suggests and proves actually that when a partner has a stay-at-home or part-time working partner, then their career generally takes off in a more significant way than it would have if you've got two working partners, because there's not as much negotiation for the working, someone being more flexible means that you've got your ability to grow your career because someone else is able to take time off for the kid, picking up the kids from school or doing school runs, and you've got a working partner, or the full-time working partner has more flexibility to be more available for their working life. So we want to be able to get to a point where we can go direct and have conversations about what we feel we're missing out on, and be really clear that it feels like our time is not taken as important. So we want to get to a place where we can start to work as a team and figure out, moving beyond just going, I need to figure out ways of getting him to do more, to getting past it. What's a better way of seeing the situation than just, I did this and he didn't do that, or he did this thing that meant I couldn't do that thing, or whatever. We want to, sit down and have conversations and figure it out together. And that's the power of matriarchy. By taking a leadership role within our family. And one really practical way that we can do that is by hosting family meetings and creating a family philosophy. And this is really powerful. I've started doing this a long time ago. My family didn't actually realize that that's what was happening until much later in the piece. We just sort of started it. And I've got a slow guide on this. It's called Creating Family Rituals. And it's inside that $17. I'll leave the link in the description box for the show notes. And it's all about creating family rites, so family rituals. And inside that, there is a PDF guide to creating your own family philosophy. We can go through and figure out your own family values. It's a series of questions, and you can come up with a family philosophy, or a family mission statement, whatever you want to call it. And that's kind of like a guiding light for you as a family. And it's a really fun activity actually to do, because you can figure out, you can talk about how you want to communicate. You can talk about how you will deal with issues. You can talk about who will do what are the things that your family wants to focus on and make as a priority, which is a really great way of then falling back and saying, hang on, we aren't meeting what we've agreed that we want to do as a family. Our priorities were to do this, this, and this, but we're spending a lot of time doing this, this, and this. And so let's figure out how we can shift this. And that's a really great way to get the kids involved as well. And in that slow guide, we talk about how to create rituals, like turning your routines into rituals, which helps you, those morning and night times particularly, helps you create a nicer family dynamic where you feel like it's not just more stuff to do. It's not just getting kids into bed or getting them out the door. It can become a really beautiful time of the day and a really good connection point. So it's all kind of really related. But as well, what I really like to do with hosting my family meetings is just do it at dinner time. Just ask a few casual questions, and then, each week night, and we just kind of talk about what's coming up, what we liked about our days. But then on a Sunday night, is when I do my planning. I personally take about half an hour every Sunday night, and I sit down and I go through my diary of what's coming up. I firm up any meetings that I've got just to make sure that they are still going to go ahead. I plan out my to-do list for the week, and I set out, all of my priorities. And then I sit down with my husband. So I guess it's not a family meeting as such, this part. It's more just me and my husband. And I sit down with him and we talk about, okay, what have you got coming up this week that I need to know about? What have I got coming up that you need to know about? And we have a shared diary within our phones on our calendars where we put in things that the other person needs to know about. And that's taken some time, but that really to get into the habit of, but it really, really works. But because we've talked about the things, it's like we can't then turn around and say, you didn't tell me that you've got that on, or you didn't tell me about that, or I didn't, all of that. It's there and we've talked about it. And it means that we can, in advance, we can reschedule our things. I then take some time to say like, all right, well, we've got this thing that needs to be done for the house. We talk about the kids' schedules and who needs to do what and be where and all of that. And just taking this very casual half an hour on a Sunday evening when everybody's quite relaxed, that's a pretty good time for us to do it. It really has meant that the lines of communication have opened up. And it was a starting point for us. And then we moved on to having more conversations around like, well, we want a different family life. We don't want the ordinary family life where I'm just doing the stay-at-home mum and you're doing the working dad. I really believe that if the focus for us as mums is the home life and the focus of the dads is work life, then they're really missing out. That's the thing about like feminism and patriarchy that I think a lot of people don't really understand, is that the patriarchy isn't men. It's the system that we live in that says what men and women should do and what their roles should be. And that means that in our modern lives, men are actually at a bit of a disadvantage because they're not as able to be involved in family life. They've got a lot of pressure on them, and I'm totally generalizing. This may not be, not everybody is fully, deep into the socialization of this, but there is a lot of pressure in the workplace and expectation. Like if you think about it, it's always the mums and the women who get the flexible working. It's very rare for a male to have flexible working arrangements, and it's very rare for them to be the ones, maybe not so much now with coronavirus or COVID or whatever, but, it's usually women taking the flexible work arrangements. So there's a lot of pressure for men to be more involved in the workplace, which means they're missing out on family life. And there's a lot that they are actually missing out on in developing those strong bonds and relationships with their families. And I think that talking about that within your own relationship and saying like, this is what we want for our families. We want you to be more involved. When you're more involved, when a father is more involved in what's going on in the home, then everybody wins. They have stronger relationships. They feel more connected to their family, and you get the help and support that you need. And there's more space for you to then go out into the world and do your work in the world. And then you feel more connected and strengthened as a family. So it's a win-win for everybody when both, a mum and a dad are involved both in work and in family life. I think that's a really important thing. And that's kind of like what the conversations have been within our family over the years. And so, yeah, I've gotten a lot better at being more direct and saying like, I feel like I need a little bit more time for the things I want to do as well. And so that's what I want to leave you with. Like I guess my takeaway for today is consider starting. It doesn't have to always just be a last straw, this big moment where you have a conversation and you throw down an ultimatum and say, if you don't change by this time, that's it, it's over. You don't have to do that. You can just start. And this is like, yes, there's going to be a little bit more mental load for you initially by getting started with having these communication moments like a family meeting or, just a general chat at nighttime, at dinner time or something. That is going to take a little bit more time and effort on your part. But over time, this starts to build up. It starts to become a natural part of your family life, and you both see the benefits, or you all see the benefits. And over time, it gets better, right? And it builds on itself. So it's funny because I think a family meeting or a family, conversations about what's going on in each of our individual lives, it's such an obvious thing, but it's not very common for people to do. And it's not common for us as women because we've been told, and our social conditioning as women has been to not upset people, to be a good girl and not rock the boat. So more direct conversations and more direct communication can be quite foreign to us. So it can feel really like a confrontation, but it doesn't have to be. You can approach it from a gentle way by just sort of, like I said, like just having a family meeting, and it doesn't need to be a confrontation. It doesn't have to be a big defining moment. It can just be an ongoing conversation, and it's just more direct and less passive than that nagging. You get a better outcome, is what I'm saying, I guess. So I'd be interested to know if that's something you would be willing to try, and how you get on with it. yeah, like I said, if you want to know more, there's the Slow Guide to Creating Family Rituals, which is a really good way to get started. That's $17. Or, as you may be aware, I do still have some spaces available for my 60-minute slow coaching consults. They're $60 for 60 minutes, which is a promotional kind of price for May, during Mental Load May. And yeah, I would love to chat with you within one of those calls. It's just 1 hour for you to kind of figure out what's the best next step for you in reducing your mental load and your overwhelm, and to create that slower family life of your dreams. Because motherhood and our family life is, we need to bring it to the forefront. We need to make it more, it is a valuable and important part. Like, motherhood doesn't have to mean martyrdom. It doesn't have to be all doing work. It can be something that you get a lot of fulfillment out of, but there are a few small tweaks that you can make and change in the way that your weeks run, just to make life so much better and for you to find that joy in motherhood again. So I would love to support you in that. So if I can do that, I would love for you to book in for one of those 60-minute consults and we can have a chat. But aside from that, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And next week we have the final episode in the 4-part series, and it's about how the mental load may be beneficial to you, and just more stepping into that leadership role. And it's going to be really fun as well. I feel like I love these episodes. I'm really enjoying them. So I hope you are as well. Lots of stories and sharing going on. So, all right, well, I'll speak to you next week, and take care. Bye. That's it for another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you'd like to connect further, the show notes from today's episode, including all the social links and free resources, are over on my website, howtoliveslow.com/podcast. Have a beautiful week ahead, and I'll speak with you again soon.